Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Having been caught red-handed secretly attempting to corruptly abuse the office of the presidency for personal gain, the president has pivoted back to his old mode of operating, which is openly abusing the office for personal gain. One day after the House delivered President Trump an enormous rebuke for his feckless response to the invasion of northeast Syria by the Turkish government, the same Turkish government that his bagman, Rudy Giuliani, appears to have been possibly working for in some way. And on the day that one of the key figures of the corrupt Ukraine scheme, the subject of the impeachment inquiry, appeared for deposition, Donald Trump sent his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, also implicated in the corrupt Ukraine scheme, to speak to the press, apparently to do two things. One, to announce to the world a new impeachable offense, which is that the president of the United States will be requiring the United States federal government and foreign governments around the world to give him money. President Trump will be hosting the G7 at his own Doral resort in Miami next June. Doral is not a place that Trump licenses. He owns it. All of the money that goes into the Doral goes into the Trump organization and ultimately into the president's pocket. On its face, this is a direct violation of the Constitution, even a high crime or misdemeanor. There will be millions and millions of dollars spent for the event. There will be incalculable amounts of global publicity for the event. That was big news. But then the other thing that Mick Mulvaney decided to do was just go ahead and admit a quid pro quo in the Ukraine scandal. Remember, we already have the White House notes from Trump's call with the Ukraine president. The president is clearly coercing a foreign leader. Right after the Ukrainian president asks for military assistance to help his currently occupied country, President Trump immediately says, "I would like you to do us a favor, though." The quid and the quo are basically cuddled up next to each other in that conversation, as tight as can be. That's already there. We also have an incredible amount of evidence just floating around that it was a quid pro quo. The U.S. chief of mission for Ukraine, remember, wrote a text saying, quote, "I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign." But remember, the line from everyone has been no quid pro quo. The president and everyone else. Well, today, Mick Mulvaney came out to say, actually, yes, quid pro quo.
So the demand for an investigation into the Democrats was part of the reason that it was ordered to withhold funding to Ukraine.
The look back to what happened in 2016 certainly was part of the thing that he was worried about in corruption with that nation. And that is absolutely appropriate. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy. I was involved with the process by which the money was held up temporarily. Okay, 3 issues for that: the corruption in the country, whether or not other countries were participating in the support of the Ukraine, and whether or not they were cooperating in an ongoing investigation with our Department of Justice. That's completely legitimate.
Now, let's be clear here. That's not how you do diplomacy. In fact, after Mick Mulvaney said that in front of the cameras, in front of the whole world, about cooperating with a Justice Department investigation, a senior Justice Department official told NBC News, quote, "If the White House was withholding aid from Ukraine with regard to any investigation by the Justice Department, that is news to us." Second of all, the claim that the quid pro quo was only about that insane rabbit hole conspiracy theory about the Democratic National Committee somehow hacking itself and then framing Russia is also obviously implausible, because we all know the president wanted 2 things. He wanted that crazy conspiracy theory investigated, and he wanted to investigate the Bidens. Again, you don't have to look far. It's all in the call notes that the White House itself released. The hair splitting Mulvaney is doing here doesn't pass the smell test. And third of all, again, no, this is not how it works. No one does this. This is how a corrupt administration works. That press conference apparently detonated like a bomb in the middle of the deposition of this guy, our good friend, Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. Sondland, you'll remember, the key figure in all this, one of the 3 amigos Trump had running point on Ukraine policy. He was allegedly consulting with Rudy Giuliani. He had no expertise in Ukraine. He got his job likely because he gave $1 million to the Trump inaugural committee. And he is also currently embroiled in his own separate scandal where he's spending public money to refurbish his official residence in Brussels, including over $33,000 on wooden household furniture and over $200,000 on a professional kitchen remodel. That's a textbook scandal that public officials resign over. Textbook. So, that guy, Sondland, today came before the House committee to essentially attempt to save his hide and point the finger at Rudy Giuliani. He just finished his deposition less than an hour ago after nearly 10 hours before the investigating committees. In his opening statement, Sondland said Rudy Giuliani told him President Donald Trump wanted Ukraine to investigate both the 2016 election and the Bidens. Whatever Sondland tried to say to get himself off the hook, there are already a lot of other people saying he is at the core of this entire corrupt and lawless enterprise. We know he is the guy who relayed the president's no quid pro quo cover story in a text message after he talked to the president. He is also the guy, Gordon Sondland, who our own Josh Lederman reports, after the end of a meeting with Ukrainian officials, took them to another room to quietly talk about a Biden investigation. We know that because John Bolton was apparently so suspicious, he sent his deputy to listen in, and she heard them talking about the Ukrainian energy company that Hunter Biden was a part of. New York Times reports Bolton was so disturbed by both Sondland's and Mulvaney's behavior that he told that aide to tell White House lawyers, and I quote, "I am not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up." Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.